Hello, you are all very welcome to this free webinar from the Irish Writers Centre. My name is Hilary Copeland. I am the Acting Director at the Irish Writers Centre, and I'm going to be talking us through today some tips and some pitfalls to avoid when it comes to applying for, making an application for applying for a bursary or for funding. So it's really great that you're all here today. If you're joining us live, please do drop us some questions in the Q&A box below, and we would love to hear from you as well if you have any other thoughts about any other free webinars that you'd like the Irish Writers Centre to present. I'll be talking and presenting some slides. I'll be running through some tips about application forms and how best to approach them. I'll be looking at cover letters and CVs and a little bit about how to present your budget as well. And I will be mainly talking a bit about how to approach your application and then some ideas about how to style some of the enclosures that you'll be putting in as well. So I will talk us through that and look forward to hearing you as well from the end. So I will just show you my slides so that you can see what I see. There we go. That's great. So here we are. Thanks so much. Got a few people saying hello, that's lovely. So let's start off. What do you need to know about putting in your application form? So these are some tips to think about whenever it comes to approaching your application. This is the kind of thing that you might be putting an application together for. You might be applying for a bursary. Arts Council of Ireland have individual bursaries, and Arts Council of Northern Ireland have a SIAP, or Support the Individual Artist scheme, both of which would be for a writer or an artist to apply for individual funding, often for a project or for research or for a piece of writing that you intend to do. You also would have an application perhaps for an opportunity like a residency, like a retreat, and the Irish Writers Centre runs a number of these in-house that we would offer and make available on our website. And we also have an opportunities page where you would see various other opportunities advertised by other similar organisations. And as well, if you went to any website for other literature organisations across the island of Ireland, you would see other opportunities that would be available there. You may also need to submit a sort of application if you were applying to teach, if you were looking to maybe sign up to an organisation who was looking for mentors, if they were putting in a call out for a facilitator, or perhaps your county council arts office as well may also ask you to submit an application. So here are a few things to think about before you start your application. Are you eligible? It's a big task sometimes putting an application together, and you don't want to find out that you spent a lot of time and a lot of energy putting something together just for you not to be eligible in the first place. Is this opportunity right for me? This is a really great question to ask yourself. You don't need to be a serial applicant. You're not going to get the best out of the application or the potential opportunity if you don't think it's really the right thing for you, if it's not the right time at your career. Sometimes it's worth looking about what you need right now, and then also thinking there are going to be opportunities available in the future for you at the right time when you need them. And is my work a good fit for this? Sometimes an organisation or a funder might be looking for something quite specific, and the temptation is to put an application anyway and hope for the best, but it's good to take the time to consider if it's a good match. Are you what they are looking for? Is a good thing to consider. Well, how do you find this out? Sometimes it can be a little bit overwhelming, and with all best intentions you might want to take part in something, but you're just not sure where to start. Well, this is what you want to do. You want to read the guidelines. Your funder, the organisation, will have considered what it is they're looking for. And they have put guidelines in place with criteria that details what they're looking for from each application. The reason organisations have criteria is that oftentimes they don't have enough funding or as many opportunities to offer as everybody who applies. So it is a competitive process. And it's worth bearing in mind that the criteria is there for the assessors to work through the applications and find the best fit to make sure that they can hone in and get a sort of laser focus when it comes to looking for the best applicant to fit that particular position. What is it you're going to need whenever it comes to your application? You may need some of these. You might not need all of them. An application form, sometimes a funder will particularly would ask for an application form, and that's so that they're asking for the same information from all of the applicants, and that allows them to compare each one in a more fair and equitable way. Sometimes you may not need to do an application form, but you would have to submit a cover letter where the onus is on you to tell the host organisation why you would be a good fit for that opportunity. And you often would be asked to include your CV as well. Sometimes an application form may also ask you to send a cover letter and your CV as well. You may or may not be asked for a project proposal. I don't really have time to go into project proposals today, but that can be something that we can look at another day. And you may also be asked for a budget. This is particularly the case if you're applying for a project, and the budget is so you can describe how it is you're going to spend the funding that you're asking for. And quite often you will also be asked for a sample of your work, or perhaps some research material if it's a project that you're looking for. They are all complementary, so each one is telling the same story. And if you think about your application as your way of telling a story, it's really good to make sure that you are encompassing all areas that the host or organisation is asking for, and that everything complements each other. So some points on what to do with your application. So definitely read the guidelines, make sure you meet the criteria. Do that in advance before you even open the application form, so you know that this is the right thing for you. Get started. Putting in an application for anything, and that counts for organisations who are putting in funding applications too, they always take a lot longer than you think they might. So it's really good to get started. It helps you get in the mindset, think about what it is you want to apply for, and make sure that you have enough time to plan your application and to collect everything together that you need in good time to make sure that you meet the deadline. Make a checklist. I find this a really useful way of approaching an application. It means that I can sit and go through everything that is asked of me, and then I can tick each section off as I go, which is very satisfying. And then at the end, when I'm ready to submit my application, it also means I can run through the checklist a second time and make sure that I am submitting everything that I have prepared. This makes sure that I haven't missed any information out. Keep copies of everything. This is really important. And I know that many of you will have heard horror stories of hard drives failing, or losing information, or losing work that you've written. The same applies to applications. Do keep copies of everything that you write. That's all of your rough material, all of your final application form, all of your enclosures. Make sure you have them all backed up. There is nothing more heartbreaking than losing some work on an application that you spent a lot of time working on. So here are some tips on what to avoid when you're putting your application together. Don't miss the deadline. That is a very sad place to be. Do check, and again, go back to your guidelines if you're not sure, but some application forms, particularly if it's an online form, they may ask you to register in advance, and if you're right up against the clock and then you realise there's an additional step you haven't foreseen, it can really be very stressful. Also check in case you need to send a hard copy of your application by post, because again, that's another factor that's out with your control, and you're going to need to give yourself some time for that. Don't do it wrong. Do have a look at what the application details, how they want you to submit the information, and do follow those instructions exactly. Sometimes at the Irish Writer Centre, we may get applicants for a residency or an opportunity, and we find that people haven't followed the instructions specifically. It's not a great sign. It shows that somebody hasn't taken a great deal of care or attention to what it is that we're asking for. And any funder or organisation is going to be looking to see if the person applying can follow instructions correctly. So do take time to make sure you are sending your application in the way that the organisation wants it. If they want all of the documents saved in one PDF and you send a number of enclosures, you're probably going to have yourself out of the running before anyone has even looked at the content of your application. don't skip the enclosures. If there are a number of other items in addition to your form or your cover letter that you have been asked to send as well, do make sure that you've prepared each one individually, and when it comes to the submission time, make sure you have enclosed everyone, whether that's in the envelope or whether that is via email or on the online form. And this is a great tip, don't be afraid to ask. Every guideline pack for any opportunity or fund that you are applying for will have contact details in it. That could be an arts officer from an arts council, or it could be from your local arts office. It could be somebody in the organisation that you're looking to contact. Do pick up the phone or send an email if there is an email address there, and check anything that you're not sure about in the guidelines. Anything that may be unclear, or if you feel that you need to submit your application in an alternative format, do get in touch with the organisation, and they should be accommodating to make sure that you can send in your application in the way you need. So here's a little bit more specifically about application forms themselves. Again, save a blank copy. If you're downloading the application from a website, do save a copy that is blank, and then save a version for you to work in. Then if anything happens, you have the blank version there ready to go back to. Save a Word doc or Google Doc with any of your draft answers. So copy and paste the questions out of the original form into a rough working document. And that's where you're going to focus most of your attention on. Then you can keep changing, checking your word counts. You can make sure that the right answers that you've supplied go in the right sections. And it is something that you can kind of keep working on before you're ready to copy and paste your final answers into the form. And do save anything that you do change along the way. So if you've saved a few different versions and you want to go back to something, it's really helpful to save the title of that document with the date that you worked on it. If your form is having to be sent online, then the same advice applies. Do keep everything in a rough working document, and then you have that ready to go into the online form. Now, sometimes online forms can be even less reliable, particularly if they're new. Sometimes your internet crashes. Sometimes the form itself might wipe the data that you have put in if you try and go back out of the page you're in, or you try and move forward to a different section, and that is very frustrating. So if you save all of your work offline, then you are prepared just in case there is an error in your form. Stick to the word counts. If it's an online application form, they may cut you off, so you'll see if you have gone over the word count. But if not, do stick quite rigidly to that. Some funders will not accept any words that are detailed after the word count. And they are looking at lots of applications at once, so they're going to want to see who can answer and meet the needs of their criteria in the most concise and relevant way. So it's in your interest to stick to the word count and make sure that you're really clear and specific in the answers you're providing. Asking someone to read back your application is great. It's always good to get a second pair of eyes on anything that you've prepared, and they can maybe help you out with some spelling or grammar or punctuation. Do think about if you're asking for feedback. That's a slightly different ask than someone just sort of proofing your work. And if you do have somebody who is prepared to give you some feedback, then make sure you have a little bit of time to amend your answers on the final form before you send it off. Little admin tip: if you're working out of Word files, you may find that sometimes there's a little bit of a formatting quirk with it. So do clear the formatting of your text in your working document before you transfer it into your final application form. And also, after you have copied and pasted everything into your form, give it a check to make sure that no text has gone missing, that you haven't forgotten anything, or that perhaps it's been cut off by the formatting in the document. A little bit of an admin secret there for you. So here is some other points to think about when it comes to your application form. Answer each question in turn. What is each section asking you? And make sure that you're responding in the right way to each question. Each question is going to be very specific because the funder or the organisation are looking for slightly different things from each question. If there are specific criteria or needs in the opportunity advertisement or in the guidelines, make sure you answer each of those in the text in your application form. This is your opportunity to show that you've understood what the organisation is looking for, and you have understood that the request and the ask of the artist who's applying. What will you do in your application form? How is it that you're going to approach the project or the ask that has been outlined? These are all things to consider and good things to make sure you have included in your form. If you can be specific, this is, for example, if you're applying for a project that is your own project and you're looking for some funding for it, what's the outcome? What's going to happen? Why should the funder give you the money to pursue the research, writing, or project that you are inquiring about? So that's a really good thing to think about. Who is doing it? What's going to happen? Where is it going to happen? How long is it going to take? What is going to happen at the end? Will there be any kind of legacy, anything that you can consider that will outlive the time frame of your project? And will there be an object, a piece of writing, publication? What will happen at the end? This is all information that your funder will be looking to know, and if you can give that to them, you will increase your chances of a successful application. And before you submit, take a step back and reflect on what it is you've written. Have you told them everything that they need to know? Have you answered all of the questions specifically? And think about where you have placed all of the information that you've given them in your form. So another little tip here, make sure you have answered the question that they have asked you and not the question you want them to ask. Sometimes when you're writing in your application forms, you've come up with a really great paragraph. It describes a brilliant thing that you've been thinking about, worded it perfectly, and the temptation is to insert it somewhere just to make sure you can keep it in. But if it doesn't answer the question, it's not going to help you, and it's also going to take up some of your word count that is really precious and might be better placed somewhere else. So something to think about is there somewhere else you can direct the reader of your application to get more information about what it is you're applying for? Maybe that's a link elsewhere. Maybe it's maybe there's an opportunity to submit additional enclosures. Think about what it is that you are answering and making sure that what you have said is what the funder wants to hear. Don't assume that they know who you are. This can be a little bit troubling, but really the good way of looking at approaching this is to think about how would you describe yourself if you wanted to describe a writer to someone else you know, but the writer is you. So although you may be applying to an organisation who has worked with you before, or maybe you know the individuals in the organisation, when you're writing your application, you want to pretend that they have no idea who you are. And this is the first time they're coming across you and your work. So that is a great time to step back and to reflect and make sure that you haven't assumed that there is prior knowledge that they are going to take into account, because most of the time whenever funders or organisations are assessing these applications, they can't take any prior information into account. They're going to be looking at what you have sent them in that one application, and that's whether that's your first application or it's your 50th. Don't skip anything. If you have the opportunity to send other information in with your application, whether this is a sample of your work, whether this is a project proposal, or as I said, any links to publications or anything elsewhere, do take that opportunity. Anything else that you can give the person who's reading and assessing your application, or perhaps a panel who's reading and assessing your application, the more information they have to go on, the better. The increases the chance of your application being successful. So we're going to move on to cover letters. Cover letters are something that you may come across in other areas of your life. If you've applied for a job before, you may have had to put a cover letter together. But quite often as an artist, you will also be asked to send a cover letter in. So there are a few things to think about. There's a technique to a cover letter, particularly if you are looking to apply for an opportunity or a residency. So here is a little bit of the shape of what your cover letter might need to look like. There are lots of ways of approaching a cover letter. This is just an idea of how I like to approach mine. This is how I would create my own, and it's also what I like to see whenever I'm making an assessment myself. So I like to see that someone has included the name of the opportunity or project or fund that they are applying for, and always worth double checking what that is and that you've got it spelled correctly and you've got the wording correct. And also make sure that you have spelled the name of the organisation correctly, and that you know who it is you're sending that to. It's good to outline what it is you're going to include in your CV. And at the beginning of your letter, do set some context for what you're going to explain to the person who's reading. So it's really good to take a chance to say, I'm really excited about this opportunity because, and to put your own spin on it. Do be authentic. Do think about what it is that you would want to bring to this opportunity, and what it is that you would get from it. Another point, a good tip to remember, is that if you're sending your cover letter and your CV together, they shouldn't be the same information copied across. Someone who's looking at your CV and sees exactly the same thing in the cover letter, it's not going to be that helpful to them. But your cover letter is where you can put the narrative on the facts that are in your CV. So they should be two objects that complement each other. They should be, one should expand a little bit on the other. So this is also another kind of, this is what your second page perhaps might look like on your CV. Good to talk about what you might have achieved, why are you a good fit for this application, why you'd be a good candidate. And this is something as well that you can do. You can move along as you create your cover letter to expand on the points in the criteria or guidelines of the call, so that you can match each criteria in your cover letter and make sure that you have referred to each one. It's really good to think about it from a really practical approach. You're going to take each criteria and you're going to respond to that in your cover letter. And then whenever the person is making the application assessment sees this, they will see that you have a really good grasp on what it is that the ask of the opportunity is, and they can see that you have met each point of the criteria. And another great thing to put into your cover letter is to talk about what it is you're offering the organisation. Why are you a good fit for this project, and what are you going to bring to it yourself? And that might be reflecting on what your particular skill set is, some experience you've had in the past. Maybe it's experience that you have gained from other areas of your life, not just from writing. And it's really good to incorporate anything that you think might be relevant. But the key is keep it relevant. Everyone would love to see a close, concise, really, really brief cover letter. Pages and pages are not going to get read, and that sounds brutal, but the person who is making these assessments isn't going to have time to read through lots and lots of pages, so do keep it really concise and really specific. So do draft your structure first. Take a really clinical eye on your cover letter and make sure that you have a little heading for each point. Break down your cover letter to make sure every paragraph meets a heading. Keep it concise. Address it to somebody. So at the beginning of your letter, you're going to write to whoever it is and make sure that is a name. So that is really easy to find out. You can Google, look up the company website, or lift the phone and find out. Make your pitch, make it personal, make it specific to you. Make sure you outline that you are a good candidate for this call. And as I said, make sure you have answered any of the needs or the criteria outlined. Make sure if there is anything additional, such as we would prefer or it would be desirable to see somebody with workshop facilitation experience or somebody who is interested in doing a reading, make sure that you make reference to that in your cover letter. And a few tips to avoid. Any letter that is addressed sirs, sir, or madam, or to whom it may concern is not going to win hearts and minds when it lands on the desk of your assessor. It shows that you've not shown any interest in your organisation and that you haven't done the basic homework of finding out who it is you're going to apply it to. Similarly, if you get an application that shows some interest and knowledge of the organisation, that is really great for an organisation to see. It shows you've engaged with them previously, it shows that you have an interest in the sector and that you know the area you're looking for. Also, to put sir, or madam at the top of a letter can be quite sexist. And there are some companies, for example, there are some publishers that will not even read your application if it comes in. And for example, if it was an all-women team and you have addressed it sirs at the top. So That's a really easy mistake to avoid. Don't be too casual. The tone of your letter should be warm, it should be professional, but not too overly friendly. And this is not somebody that you know in a personal context, it's a professional context, and that is the pitch that you are making. And again, keep it really clear and concise. Don't make it loads and loads of pages long. Do a little check for spelling, grammar, and punctuation. Again, ask someone who can have a look at that for you. And no matter how many kind of cover letters you've done, it's always good to take another chance to get someone to read over that and give you some feedback as well. If you send them the guidelines and they're willing to read over those for you as well, it means that they can have a look and see how your letter stands up with what the ask and request is. So after you've done your cover letter, we're going to move on to the CVs. So this is a sample CV, which I just pulled from the internet, and you can find another CV, you can find loads and loads of templates online. This is just an example of how you can lay it out. There are lots of different alternative ways you can think about doing that. But one thing I really like to see with a CV is a short statement at the top. That's a really useful way of telling the person reading your CV who you are, and giving a little bit of narrative to the rest of the form, which can be, or the rest of your CV, which is mostly factual based. You can see that this CV has also looked at education background, professional experience, and then has referred to other areas of experience, and that will probably change depending on what your own experience is, whether you have awards or publications, if you've been members, if you're a member of any organisation, or perhaps if you have had any other awards or achievements yourself. One question that sometimes writers and artists ask is, what do I do if my CV has a great deal of freelance experience on it? How do I include lots of small jobs on my CV? So one approach is that you can create a CV that is, in addition to being chronological, broken down by skill set. So perhaps as a writer, you have worked in lots of different areas. Maybe you have done some teaching. Maybe you have also done, we've worked with schools. Maybe you want to include your publications in there. So it can be a helpful approach to break down your CV by category, and then you can keep all of your awards together, keep all of your teaching experience together, and so on. But do you have a think about what is the most relevant approach for you? This is an example of a CV where this is my CV, and I worked for a number of years in freelance as a freelance creative producer, but I also worked in lots of different areas. So what I did is that I sort of took all of that freelance experience and I put it together in one section of my CV, and then depending on what it was I was applying for, I then highlighted a few different examples of what were the most relevant to the role or the opportunity that I was applying to at the time. So when it comes to your CV, do tailor your CV for every application. Anytime that I see a copy and paste CV, it sort of makes me think, I'm not sure if this person has really taken the time they needed for this. Be specific, be relevant, and keep it really short. And do personalize that. Do personalize your CV for every opportunity or every application it is that you're putting in. Include your contact details. Those would usually be found at the top of your CV. Your email and phone number are probably the most useful, but do bear in mind you don't need to put your date of birth in, and you don't have to put a national insurance or PRSI number in. Include your dates, chronological, and work backwards from your most recent experience. And if you're also categorizing your CV in a slightly different way, it's still most helpful if you're categorizing it, if each category is then in a chronological way. You can make reference to your referees, but most often you won't have to include an actual reference in the application stage. You don't also have to name your referees. You can put in that that references are available on request. If you do put in named referees, always check with each of those people, each of those persons, that it's okay with them if you can include their details in that application. Even if they've said yes in the past, do check again for every time you are putting an application in. So don't, as I mentioned, put in the same version of your CV repeatedly. We quite often will get people who have applied for something in the past and they apply for something in the future, and that is really great, and we would definitely encourage that. But if you're submitting identical material every time, then that kind of quickly becomes apparent to people who are also assessing lots of CVs and lots of applications. Less is more when it comes to CVs. So if you've got overly complicated design or lots of color, lots of images, anything that it could be potentially print heavy or ink heavy, then it's best to be avoided. And you do want the content of your CV to be the main focus of the reader whenever they get it in front of their desk. Include everything if it is relevant, but not if it's not. That will depend on what your application is for, and you might be a good idea to kind of keep hold of all of your work history and all of your artistic practice history as well in one place, so that you can pull out the right information for the right application, because you're not going to need all of it for everything all at the same time. And don't forget to check your spelling, grammar, and punctuation, which I could have done with as well today. I'm going to move on now to budgets. This is something that can be a little bit frightening for people whenever they're putting a project proposal together, or that they have been asked to submit a budget along with their application. But they're not that scary. Once you look at the kind of template or the format for your budget, you will kind of use a very similar version for every budget that you're putting together. And I'm going to show you the kind of budget that could be useful if you're an artist applying for perhaps a bursary or a project proposal for funding. So here along the left-hand side, this is expenditure. So this is everything that you will spend as part of the project you're applying for. Down the left-hand side is the category, travel, accommodation. These are examples. You may have other categories what you put in. You might have materials you want to put in there. So do take some time to think about everything you might be spending as part of your proposal or your project. Then you can offer some additional detail. It's really good to be upfront about this, because otherwise a funder would have to come back and ask you for additional details, which may hold up your application, or in some cases may make it ineligible. So do provide that in the first instance if you can. So here, travel was a huge part of this project. So there were some trains, planes, boat included, and mileage. So those are all things to think about. If you're including mileage, do check in your kind of local area in Ireland or elsewhere what the kind of going rate as dictated by the revenue would be, and include that. If it's for an organisation, then it's worth checking if they have a mileage rate. Accommodation and fee. Accommodation, it really depends. In this instance, with this application, accommodation was part of that was in kind, so funded by the applicant themselves. And with the fee, it's really important that you cost your time appropriately. So do be realistic about what it is you need to make sure that you can make that project happen. And as you can see down the right-hand side here, the total cost of the project itself is running totals kept down that right column, and also what you're asking from the funder. So more than likely, a funder wouldn't be interested in funding 100% of your project proposal. They may be looking for you to show that you're willing to commit something yourself, or sometimes if you have found funding from another source, they'd be interested in seeing what that other funder is committed. So do put that information in, and include where your funding from other sources has been secured or may be pending, or something that you have explored but not yet finalized. And then the other side of your expenditure is your income. So this is how I would detail income that for a project or proposal. This could be, for example, this for a SIAP award, and you would be looking at making sure you have included income from a funder, but also from other funds. So in kind, if that is something that is not actual cash coming into you, but that you're able to provide, someone can volunteer some work for you, or you're able to borrow maybe some materials or some tech to make sure you can kind of do what you need to do, that can go in as in-kind contributions, and that is an important element to include. So don't discount anything that isn't physical cash if there is a way that you can put a price on that. And then make sure you have totaled that up. Make sure that the total of your income matches the total of your expenditure. That's really key important. So this is what you can think about when it comes to putting your budget together. Carefully consider all of your costs. There may be some unexpected that come along as you progress with your proposal. It's good to get all of that in the application if you can. If you've completed your application, you've got their funding and there are other costs have appeared, you'll need to report those to your funder as well. Very important to cost for your time, whether that's writing or researching. It's really, really important that you include that and you make sure that the writing that you're including is really valuable, that you've spent some time on that. Do include any time that is spent consulting or in meetings, in addition to just the writing or researching of your project. And if you are also asking for funding in your budget for materials, do get quotes so that you have some evidence to provide to your funder that you have researched appropriate costings for each of those items and that the figures you've included in your budget are realistic. Being realistic overall with your budget is quite key. It's not free money. There will be an ask of you if you are successful in your funding application or for your bursary. So do make sure you have kind of considered what the real costs would be. Things not to do. Don't wildly overestimate your budget. It is tempting, but more often than not, and in the case with this sample budget here, you won't get everything that you ask for in your funding application or your bursary application. If you know, or it's worth having a little bit of time researching what the usual awards for a fund might be, you can quite often go to a funder's website and the results of the previous year or previous rounds funding application will be there. And you can have a look, download that information. It's all publicly available. You can see what the average grant or fund would be. And that can help you give you an idea of what you should be applying for. Don't promise anything you can't deliver. Think realistically, think about the time frame that you have in order to deliver your project. If you do get the funding, you'll need to do what you've promised to do. And it can get complicated if you run into problems further down the line and you have maybe overestimated how much it is you can achieve. Don't lose your receipts. Another admin secret, you're going to need to hold on to anything that you spend from the award that you receive. So any invoices, any receipts, anything that's in your inbox, flag it up, put a little label on it. Anything in paper, make sure you put that in a safe place and label what it is that the receipt is for, because you're going to need all of the evidence, and it's very frustrating when you realize that you've lost something. So those are sort of all the tips that we have for you today when it comes to putting an application in, to creating your CV and cover letter, and for looking at the budget for your application. So we hope that those are interesting. We hope that they're useful and that you might have some success with your application there. So I just wanted to check if anybody had any questions or if there was anything you wanted some further information on or anything further that we can help you with. So if there's any questions, do pop them here. Do you get a copy of the slides? Yeah, absolutely. We can make a copy of the slides available to everybody who has been listening as part of the live broadcast today. Let me have a look at some of the questions. I'm going to just stop sharing my screen for now and hope that I can have a look at some of the questions in the Q&A section now. So one of the questions is, would you include your day job on your artist CV? Yeah, I think that is an appropriate thing to include. The lay of the land is that everyone who's working in the arts is quite often working in lots of different areas, and it's okay to make reference to that. Particularly if you're looking at a chronological way, then someone may be interested in seeing if you're able to explain any gaps in your CV, that can be a helpful thing as well. Any other questions anybody might have? Let's see. How do you know if you are a good fit for an opportunity? I always think it's really worthwhile going back to the guidelines that the funder has issued, or if it's an organisation who has put a call out on their website, go back to that and see what it is they're asking. So sometimes this will be worded like they are looking for, or the candidate should have, and sometimes it's essential criteria, sometimes there is an additional criteria that is desirable, and it's really good if you can respond to both of those in different ways. I think that is really where you're going to find the key information to let you know if that you are a good fit for the opportunity. Again, as I mentioned before, it's worth having a look at that organisation or that funder if they have run a similar opportunity before, or if they have run that funding scheme before. Go and see what you can find out about the opportunity that you're applying for, and have a look if the information of who was successful in previous years is available online, or if you can find out what they received the funding for or how that played out. If you have any idea if that worked, it's really good to show an interest in the organisation. So some research is really helpful, and that will help you kind of get a good sense of what has been successful, so that you can steer your application in a successful way. So you might find some information there. So another question here is it okay to list living costs like rent in your budget? So one good thing to think about is that if you are freelance or self-employed, you might find that there is some information online. I would check out Citizens Advice, and I would check out the revenue, because there will be, if you're self-employed, ways that you can claim your domestic expenses like rent, like your electricity or heat, because if where you are working is your home space, then you can perhaps look at whether, it really depends on where it is you're living. So I know, so I'm not as up on what Irish revenue regulations would be, so do have a look on external sources for that. But quite often there are ways that you can expense some of those costs because you are working in your home environment, so your home is your workplace as well. A question here is about a reasonable cost per hour for writing time, and that's a really difficult question to answer. I think for me, if I was trying to find that out, I would be looking to see what organisations had as terms of pay rates or pay scales. Some of that information is available online. I know you can find out information on the Irish Writers' Centre rates of pay on our website, and you can also look at Words Ireland. They have a list of comparable rates with lots of different literature organisations in Ireland. And I do know that Arts Council Ireland are offering some advice in terms of pay scales, but I do know that it's quite difficult to put a price on that as an individual. So that's not something I'm going to be able to give you a specific answer to, unfortunately. Another question here is about a central website. Is there a central website that lists current upcoming bursaries and residencies? So there isn't one that I would recommend apart from the Irish Writers' Centre. We do have a section on our website which is for opportunities, and we would list residencies, retreats, any competitions that will be coming up, and people who are running competitions are also very welcome to submit their information to us at the Writers' Centre, and we will put that up on our website. There are lots of other websites as well who will run, who will list what's coming up, and also newsletters. E-newsletters are a really good place to get information. So Arts Council Ireland's e-newsletter can be a good place. If you're in Northern Ireland, I know the Community Arts Partnership newsletter is very popular. I'll quite often list a lot of residencies and opportunities that are coming up as well. So have a little look. Ask your friends if you know some other writers. Ask them where they are getting some information from, or have they any recommendation of good e-newsletters to subscribe to, or websites where they find a lot of information. There are lots of other organisations who are out there supporting writers as well. Irish Writers Union, Poetry Ireland, so you may find some of those other organisations have other opportunities listed on their websites too. Let's see, other questions. Somebody has asked about including a headshot beside their profile on their CV. That's absolutely fine. There's no kind of yes or no in terms of doing that. It's less likely nowadays that people are printing out every CV, and it used to be when people were printing out hard copies, so anything that was quite heavy on printer ink would sort of be a little bit of a pain for organisations. That's less common now, and I think as long as your CV is otherwise really clear and has all of your information on it, there'll be no issue about including a headshot in that. Another question here, great question, is what does in kind mean? So if you have got funding from an organisation or a funder, then that is money that usually is transferred from the organisation to your bank account. In kind would be support or something that was useful for you in delivering your project that wasn't cash in a kind of like money in your bank account or a payment that you needed to exchange. So that could be equipment that you can borrow, so you're not having to pay for the equipment yourself. Or it could be some time if there is somebody who is volunteering their expertise to help you in a mentoring capacity, or in another way where they're able to give you some advice or help you or volunteer or assist you in your delivery of your project, then that would be in-kind support. And it can be useful to kind of put a figure on that so that you can account for the fact that without that you wouldn't have been able to deliver your project. Okay, one other question here that has been submitted. I talked about project proposals, and that topic would be covered later. Is that something that people would be interested in hearing a little bit more? We've been working around lots of different ideas for similar information sessions at the Writers' Centre. So if there is something specific, like if you'd like to hear about project proposals or any other topic, then please do let us know. You can let us know here. You can drop a little note in the chat box, or if you want to send us an email, or you can get in touch with us through any of our social media channels. That's also somewhere where we would have a look, and we'd be really interested in your feedback as well. So as I said, if you have any feedback, do drop us a line. The email address to get us on is info@writerscentre.ie, or you can also have a look at our Facebook page, our Instagram profile, or on Twitter, and we'd be really, really glad to hear any of your thoughts and if your feedback. As well, this session is recorded and will be available on YouTube, so you can drop us a comment or question in the box below as well. So I will just check if anybody has any other questions on today's topic of applications, or anything more on CVs, or anything more about budgets that you would like to hear about today. But if that is it from everybody, then I would love to thank you all for paying attention today. It's been really great to have this opportunity to hear from you. And as I said, we'd love to hear a little bit more from you about what you think about these sorts of opportunities from the Writers' Centre. So please do get in touch. Please do let us know what you think. And if, as I mentioned, any other topics that you think would be useful, particularly regarding supporting writers, promoting writers, informing writers, that's exactly what we're looking to help support you and deliver. So do give us a shout. Otherwise, that's it from me today. Thanks so much for your attention, and I look forward to hearing from you again soon. Thanks, bye.